All right, let's talk about one of the most mind-bending philosophers you've probably never heard of, Plotinus, 3rd century CE. And here's what's wild about this guy. He took Plato's already abstract ideas about reality and said, you know what? We can go deeper. Think about this for a second. What if everything you see around you, this room, your body, the physical world, what if all of that is just the faintest echo of something infinitely more real? That's where we're headed today. Plotinus didn't just theorize about reality. He built an entire architecture of existence, a blueprint that would influence Western thought for over 1,000 years. We're going to explore 3 big questions. What is the nature of ultimate reality? How does the physical world relate to it? And here's the kicker. How do you, as a conscious being, fit into this cosmic structure? This isn't just ancient philosophy gathering dust. This is about understanding your place in the universe. So buckle up. Let me paint you a picture of who this guy was. Born around 204 CE in Egypt, and already we're in interesting territory because Egypt at this time was this incredible melting pot of Greek philosophy, Eastern mysticism, and emerging Christian thought. Plotinus studies in Alexandria under this mysterious figure named Ammonius Saccas, and when I say mysterious, I mean it. We have almost no writings from Ammonius. He's like the philosophical ghost who trained some of the most important thinkers of late antiquity. What we do know is that Ammonius taught Plotinus to see connections between different philosophical traditions that others missed. Then, at age 40, Plotinus moves to Rome, and for the next 25 years he's teaching, he's developing his philosophy, he's attracting students from across the Roman Empire. But here's what's fascinating. Plotinus himself never wrote a systematic treatise. He wrote these scattered essays, responding to questions, working through problems. It was his student Porphyry who later organized everything into what we call the Enneads. The Enneads, literally groups of 9, 6 books, 9 treatises each. Porphyry arranged them deliberately, starting with more accessible ethical questions and building toward the deepest metaphysical mysteries. It's like a philosophical ladder, and each rung takes you higher into understanding the nature of reality itself. And here's why this matters. This wasn't just one guy's opinion. This became the framework for understanding reality for centuries. Christian theologians, Islamic philosophers, Renaissance humanists, they all had to grapple with Plotinus. His influence is everywhere, even when people don't realize they're thinking in Plotinian terms. Okay, so what exactly is this text that shaped Western thought for a millennium? Let's break down the Enneads. First, the structure. 6 books, 9 treatises each, 54 philosophical essays total. But don't think of this like a textbook you read front to back. Porphyry arranged these strategically. He starts you off with ethics, with questions about virtue and the good life, stuff that feels concrete, relatable. Then gradually, he's pulling you deeper. By the time you're in the later books, you're wrestling with the nature of being itself, the origin of all existence, the relationship between unity and multiplicity. It's brilliant pedagogical design, actually. Porphyry understood that you can't just drop someone into the deep end of metaphysics. You need to build the conceptual framework first. Now here's what makes the Enneads so remarkable. It's a synthesis. Plotinus isn't just rehashing Plato. He's taking Platonic philosophy as his foundation, sure, those eternal forms, the distinction between the intelligible and sensible worlds. But then he's weaving in Aristotelian logic, Pythagorean mysticism about numbers and harmony, even Stoic ideas about the soul's relationship to the cosmos. What emerges is something entirely new. This is Neoplatonism. Neo because it's Plato reimagined, restructured, taken to places Plato himself never quite articulated. And this becomes the dominant philosophical framework for understanding reality for over 1,000 years. When Augustine is trying to make sense of Christian theology, he's working through Plotinian categories. When Islamic philosophers like Al-Farabi are building their cosmologies, Plotinus is there. Renaissance humanists rediscovering ancient wisdom, they're coming back to the Enneads. This isn't just historical curiosity. The questions Plotinus asks about the nature of consciousness, about how mind relates to matter, about whether there's something beyond the physical universe, these are still live philosophical questions. We're still wrestling with this stuff. All right, now we get to the heart of it, Plotinus's vision of reality. And I want you to completely rethink how you imagine the universe. Most of us, when we think about what exists, we start with the physical world, the stuff we can see and touch. Maybe we add in minds, consciousness, abstract concepts. But we're basically building up from the material. Plotinus flips this completely upside down. For him, reality is structured in 3 fundamental levels. He calls them hypostases, which just means underlying realities, or substances. And these 3 levels form a hierarchy, but not in the way you might think. At the very top, and I mean top in terms of perfection, reality, being itself, is the One. Now, the One is going to sound weird because it's beyond everything we can conceptualize. It's not a being, not even God in the way we usually use that word. It's absolute unity, absolute simplicity, the source of everything else. Plotinus says we can barely even talk about it because any description we give, it's good, it's perfect. Even those words are too limiting. The One is beyond being, beyond thought, beyond language. But here's what's crucial. The One isn't sitting there deciding to create things. It's not a divine craftsman. Instead, reality emanates from the One the way light radiates from the sun, necessarily, inevitably. Not because the One wills it, but because perfection naturally overflows. From the One emanates the intellect, Nous in Greek. This is the realm of eternal forms, of perfect archetypes, of pure thought thinking itself. When Plato talked about the form of the good, the form of beauty, the perfect circle that all physical circles imitate, that's all here in the intellect. This is the first level of multiplicity, where the absolute unity of the One differentiates into distinct, eternal patterns. And from the intellect emanates the soul, Psyche. This is the principle of life, of animation, of consciousness. But it's not your individual soul yet. It's the world soul, the universal principle that mediates between the eternal, unchanging realm of forms and the temporal, changing physical world. See the pattern? Each level is a step down in unity, a step down in perfection, but a step up in complexity and multiplicity. The One is absolutely simple. The intellect contains the many forms. The soul contains countless individual souls and animates the entire cosmos. This is the architecture. 3 levels, each flowing from the One above it, each a dimmer reflection of the reality above. And somewhere down at the bottom of all this, that's where we find the physical world, matter, bodies, the realm we usually think of as real. But hold on, if the physical world is at the bottom of this hierarchy, what does that mean for how we should understand our own existence? That's where things get really interesting, and that's exactly where we're headed next. Okay, so here's where we need to get really precise about how this whole system works, because this is where Plotinus breaks from almost every other account of how reality comes to be. When most people think about creation, they're imagining something like this. There's a creator, God, a demiurge, whatever, and this creator decides to make something. There's intention, there's will. There's a moment where creation happens. Let there be light, right? Creation ex nihilo. Out of nothing. Plotinus says, no, that's not how this works at all. Reality doesn't spring from an act of will. It's not a decision. The One doesn't wake up one day and think, you know what? I'm going to make a universe. Instead, reality flows from the One, the way light radiates from the sun. And this is the crucial metaphor. When the sun shines, does it diminish? Does the sun have less light because it's illuminating the world? No. The light just is what the sun does. It's the natural, necessary expression of what the sun is. Same with the One. Being perfect, being absolutely full, it naturally overflows. This overflow is emanation. It's not creation. It's not production in the craftsman sense. It's more like abundance that can't help but spill over. And here's what's beautiful about this. The One loses nothing in this process. It remains completely unchanged, completely perfect, completely unified. The intellect emanates from it, but the One isn't diminished. The soul emanates from the intellect, but the intellect remains complete. Each level is a reflection, a lesser expression of the level above it, but the source remains untouched. Plotinus describes this process as both contemplative and productive. What does that mean? Well, the intellect contemplates the One, it turns its gaze upward toward the source, and in that contemplation it produces the soul. The soul contemplates the intellect, and in that contemplation it produces the physical world. It's like each level is trying to return to its source, and in that yearning, that turning toward, it generates the level below. Think about this for a second. This means reality isn't arbitrary. It's not random. It's a necessary outpouring from a perfect source, structured by this rhythm of emanation and contemplation. The universe has an inherent logic, an inherent order, because it all flows from unity. But, and here's where it gets tricky, if everything flows from the One, if it's all this beautiful cascade of being, where does imperfection come from? Where does evil come from? Where does the messy, chaotic, often painful physical world fit into this picture? That's exactly what we need to tackle next. Alright, reality check time. We've been talking about the One, the intellect, the soul, these exalted, eternal, perfect realms. But what about this? What about the world you're sitting in right now? The physical body you inhabit? The material universe of atoms and entropy and decay? For Plotinus, the sensible world, the world we perceive with our senses, is image, not origin. It's a reflection, a shadow cast by the luminous, intelligible realms above it. And I want you to really sit with that metaphor for a second. A shadow has a kind of reality. You can see it, it's there, but it's dependent. It's derivative. It only exists because there's something more real casting it. The physical world is like that. It's not an illusion exactly. Plotinus isn't saying nothing is real, it's all in your head. But it's a lower manifestation, it's being at its dimmest, reality at its most diluted. The further you move down the chain of emanation, the less unity you have, the more multiplicity, the more change and corruption and impermanence. And at the very bottom of this hierarchy, matter. Now, here's where Plotinus gets really interesting. Matter, for him, represents the furthest point from the One. It's not evil in itself, that's crucial. Plotinus isn't a dualist saying matter is bad and spirit is good. No, matter is more like an absence, a privation. It's the limit point of emanation, where being fades into almost not being. It's formlessness, potential without actuality, the dimmest echo of reality you can possibly get before you hit absolute nothing. Think of it like this. The One is pure light. The intellect is brilliant illumination. The soul is softer light. And matter? Matter is the edge of darkness where light can barely penetrate. It's not that darkness fights against light, it's just where light runs out. But here's what this means for how we understand the physical world. Everything in it, your body, this room, the entire cosmos, is a mixture of form and matter. The forms come from above, from the intellect, mediated through soul. They give things structure, pattern, beauty, intelligibility. Matter is what receives those forms, what makes them physical, what introduces change and impermanence. So when you look at something beautiful in the physical world, a sunset, a piece of music, a mathematical equation, what you're seeing is form shining through matter. You're glimpsing the intelligible realm reflected in the sensible. The physical world isn't worthless or evil. It's just not where the action really is. It's not the source. And here's the final piece. No creation ex nihilo. Plotinus completely rejects the idea that the universe was created out of nothing. That doesn't make sense in his system. The world arises through emanation, a necessary outpouring from an overflowing source. It's always been flowing, always will be. There's no moment of creation, no divine decision, just the eternal rhythm of emanation from the One, through the intellect and soul, down to the physical realm. But if that's the structure of reality, if the physical world is just a shadow of something infinitely more real, then what does that mean for you? For your consciousness, your soul, your existence as a thinking, feeling, being stuck in a physical body? That's the question that drives everything else in Plotinus's philosophy. And that's exactly where we're going next. The soul's journey, and why understanding this cosmic architecture changes everything about how you should live your life. Alright, now we get to the part that makes all of this matter, because Plotinus isn't just giving us an abstract cosmology for intellectual entertainment. This whole system, the One, the intellect, the soul, emanation, it's all building toward one crucial insight. You don't belong here. Not in a depressing way. In a profound way. Your soul, your true self, originates in those higher realms we've been talking about. You're not just this physical body stumbling through a material world. You carry within you a spark of the divine, a connection to the intellect, ultimately to the One itself. But here's the problem. You've descended. Your soul has become embodied, entangled in matter, identified with the physical. And most people spend their entire lives completely unaware of their true nature. They think they are the body, the desires, the sensory experiences. They're living in the shadow and mistaking it for the sun. Philosophy, for Plotinus, is the practice of waking up. It's the soul's journey home, the ascent back to its source. And this isn't metaphorical. Plotinus genuinely believed this was possible, that through disciplined practice you could elevate your consciousness back through the levels of reality. Look at the 3 stages on this slide. First, purification. This is where you start. You have to detach from the senses, discipline your desires, stop identifying with the body and its demands. This isn't about hating the physical. Remember, matter isn't evil, but about recognizing it for what it is, the lowest, dimmest level of reality. Why would you want to stay there? The ancient philosophical schools had practices for this: meditation, contemplation, ethical discipline. Plotinus was influenced by all of them. You cultivate virtue not because there's a rule book, but because virtue is the natural state of a soul aligned with its true nature. When you're greedy, lustful, angry, that's the soul confused, thinking it's the body, grasping at shadows. Second stage, contemplation. Once you've purified yourself, once you've created some distance from the sensory world, you can begin to turn inward, and this is where it gets really interesting. You start to access the intellect directly. You contemplate the forms, not as abstract concepts you learned in a philosophy class, but as living realities you can know directly, intellectually, intuitively. Plotinus describes this as a kind of thinking that's different from ordinary reasoning. It's not discursive, not moving from premise to conclusion. It's more like direct apprehension. You see the form of beauty itself, not just beautiful things. You grasp mathematical truths not by calculation but by intellectual vision. The intellect thinks all the forms simultaneously, eternally, and when you access that level, you participate in that eternal thinking. But even that's not the end. Even the intellect, magnificent as it is still a level of multiplicity. There are many forms, many thoughts, distinction and difference. The final stage is Henosis, union with the One. And here's where language completely breaks down. Plotinus tries to describe this experience. He claims to have achieved it several times, but he admits words fail. It's not a union where you remain separate and then join with something else. It's more like the dissolution of separation itself. The subject-object distinction collapses. You don't contemplate the One, that would still be duality. You become one with it, or rather, you realize you never were truly separate. Plotinus calls this the soul's homecoming, not escape, not rejection of the world, but fulfillment of the soul's deepest nature. You originated in the One. The whole cosmic drama of emanation and descent has been leading to this: the return journey, the ascent back to the source. And here's what's crucial. Plotinus thinks you have 2 aspects. There's the higher self, what he calls the undescended soul, that never left the intelligible realm. It's still there, still connected, still contemplating the forms. And there's the lower self, your embodied personality, your ego, your sense of being a separate individual in time and space. Philosophy is about identifying with the higher self, remembering what you truly are and making the ascent. It's not easy, most people never even attempt it, but it's possible. And it's the whole point of human existence. The soul yearns to return, not because someone commands it, not because there's a moral obligation, but because it's in the very nature of the soul to seek its source, the way a river flows back to the ocean. Let me tell you something that Plotinus understood that most philosophers miss. Every soul yearns to return. This isn't poetic language. This isn't mystical hand-waving. This is, for Plotinus, a metaphysical fact about the structure of consciousness. You, right now, whether you realize it or not, are pulled toward the One the way iron is pulled toward a magnet. It's built into the very fabric of what you are. But here's the thing. Most people never feel that pull consciously. Why? Because they're too identified with the lower levels. They think happiness is pleasure, success is wealth, fulfillment is getting what you want in the physical world. And so they spend their whole lives chasing shadows, never realizing there's something infinitely more real calling to them. The ascent isn't about escape. That's the misconception people have about Plotinus, about Neoplatonism generally, that it's world-denying, that it hates the body, that it wants to flee physical existence. No. The ascent is about fulfillment. It's about actualizing your deepest nature. It's about becoming what you truly are. Think about it this way. A seed buried in soil isn't escaping. When it grows toward the light, it's fulfilling its nature. A river flowing to the ocean isn't rejecting the mountains where it began. It's completing its journey. That's what the soul's ascent is like. And the journey transforms you. As you move through purification, as you practice contemplation, as you, if you're lucky, if you're disciplined, if grace allows it, experience moments of Henosis. You're not the same person anymore. Your values shift. What seemed important becomes trivial. What seemed abstract becomes vividly real. Plotinus describes people who've made this ascent as living in two worlds simultaneously. They're still here, still embodied, still going about daily life, but their center of gravity has shifted. They're rooted in the intelligible realm, and the physical world is like a place they visit, a role they play, but not who they fundamentally are. And here's what's beautiful. This isn't reserved for special people, for mystics or saints or philosophical geniuses. Plotinus thinks this capacity is in every soul. You have this potential right now. The higher self, the undescended soul that's still contemplating the forms, that's you. You just have to remember it. You have to turn your attention away from the sensory noise and toward the silent presence of the intelligible. The ascent is a return home, not to a place you've never been, but to what you've always been, underneath all the confusion and identification with the body and the ego, and the endless stream of desires and fears. Every soul yearns to return. The question is, will you listen to that yearning? Will you do the work of purification and contemplation? Will you risk the dissolution of everything you think you are for the sake of what you truly are? That's the challenge Plotinus leaves us with. Not just an intellectual system to admire, but a path to walk, a transformation to undergo, a homecoming to complete. All right, let's make sure we've got the vocabulary down, because these terms are going to keep coming up if you ever dig deeper into Neoplatonism or the traditions it influenced. And honestly, these aren't just technical jargon. Each one points to something profound about the nature of reality and consciousness. Henosis. This is the big one. The word literally means union or oneness in Greek, but we're not talking about union in the ordinary sense, not like two things coming together. Henosis is the mystical union with the One, the soul's ultimate destination. And here's what makes it so hard to wrap your head around. It's beyond thought, beyond language, beyond any kind of subject-object relationship. When you think about something, there's you, the thinker, and the thing you're thinking about. That's duality. Henosis transcends that entirely. It's a dissolution of separation. Plotinus says that in that moment, and he claims to have experienced it 4 times in his life, you don't know the One as an object of knowledge. You become one with it. Or rather, you realize the separation was always illusory. There's no you and the One, there's just unity, pure and simple. And listen, I know this sounds abstract, maybe even impossible, but Plotinus isn't alone in describing this kind of experience. Mystics across traditions, Christian, Islamic, Hindu, Buddhist, they all report something similar. A moment where the boundaries of self dissolve, where you experience reality as fundamentally unified. Whether you think that's genuine metaphysical insight or just an interesting brain state, the fact that people keep reporting it is philosophically significant. Hypostasis. Plural. Hypostases. This just means underlying reality or substantial existence. The 3 hypostases are the One, the Intellect, and the Soul. Those 3 fundamental levels of reality we've been talking about. Each one is a distinct mode of being, a different way that reality exists. What's crucial here is that these aren't just concepts or categories. For Plotinus, these are real. They're not human inventions or ways of organizing our thoughts, they're the actual structure of the cosmos. The One really exists as the absolute source. The intellect really exists as the realm of eternal forms. The soul really exists as the animating principle of the universe. And each hypostasis emanates from the one above it, which brings us to our third term, emanationism. This is the doctrine that all reality flows from a single perfect principle, not through creation in the biblical sense, no divine craftsman, no let there be light moment. Instead, it's a natural, necessary overflow of goodness and being. Here's the key insight. Emanation isn't an act of will. The one doesn't decide to emanate the intellect. The intellect doesn't choose to emanate the soul. It happens because perfection naturally overflows. It's like how the sun doesn't decide to shine. Shining is just what the sun does. Being luminous is its nature. And this has huge implications. It means the universe isn't arbitrary. There's no, why did God create the world question that needs answering, because creation isn't a decision. It's a necessary outpouring from the nature of ultimate reality itself. The cosmos exists because the One is perfect, and perfection naturally radiates being. It also means, and this is important, that evil isn't a positive force. There's no cosmic battle between good and evil, no Satan figure rebelling against the One. Evil, for Plotinus, is privation, the absence of good, the absence of being. It emerges at the furthest reaches of emanation, where being fades into almost nothing, where form barely holds together in matter. Evil is what happens when you're maximally distant from the source. Now, you might push back on this. You might say, wait, if everything emanates necessarily from a perfect source, doesn't that make everything deterministic? Where's free will? Where's moral responsibility? Good question. Plotinus would say that the soul has a kind of freedom precisely because it can choose where to direct its attention. You can identify with the body and the senses, descending further into matter and multiplicity. Or you can turn your gaze upward, practice contemplation, make the ascent toward the One. The structure of reality is given, but your orientation within that structure, that's up to you. These three concepts, Henosis, hypostases, emanationism, they're the core of Plotinian metaphysics. Get these and you've got the framework for understanding not just Plotinus but the entire Neoplatonic tradition that flows from him. And that tradition, as we're about to see, shaped Western and Islamic thought for over a millennium. Okay, so why does any of this matter? Why are we spending time on a 3rd century Egyptian philosopher most people have never heard of? Because Plotinus didn't just create an interesting philosophical system, he created a conceptual framework that became foundational for how Western and Islamic civilizations understood reality, consciousness, and the divine for over 1,000 years. Let's start with Christian theology. Augustine of Hippo, arguably the most influential Christian theologian after Paul, he was a Neoplatonist before he was a Christian. When Augustine reads Plotinus, something clicks. Suddenly, he has a philosophical framework for understanding God as transcendent unity, for making sense of the soul's relationship to the divine, for explaining how evil can exist without being created by a good God. The Augustinian tradition that dominates medieval Christianity, it's fundamentally Plotinian. When Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart or John of the Cross talk about union with God, about the soul's ascent, about the divine darkness beyond all concepts, they're working within a Neoplatonic framework. Even the doctrine of the Trinity gets interpreted through Plotinian categories. The Father as the One, the Son as the Logos, similar to the Intellect, the Spirit as the animating principle, like the soul. Now here's what's fascinating. Islamic philosophy goes through the exact same process. Al-Farabi in the 10th century, Avicenna in the 11th, they're reading Plotinus, often through later Neoplatonic commentators, and they're using emanationist metaphysics to build Islamic cosmology. How does the created world relate to Allah? Through emanation. What's the nature of the soul? Plotinian categories. How do you achieve spiritual perfection? The ascent back to the source. Islamic Neoplatonism becomes this incredible synthesis of Greek philosophy and Quranic theology. And it doesn't just stay in the Islamic world. When these texts get translated into Latin in the 12th and 13th centuries, they blow European minds. Suddenly, Christian scholars are reading Aristotle, except some of it is actually Plotinus misattributed, and it transforms medieval philosophy. Then we get to the Renaissance, and Plotinus comes roaring back. The Florentine Academy, led by Marsilio Ficino, translates the Enneads into Latin for the first time. And Renaissance humanists go wild for this. Here's a philosophical system that elevates human dignity. Your soul is divine. You can ascend to union with the ultimate. You're not just a fallen sinner groveling before God. You're a spark of the divine capable of cosmic consciousness. This feeds into Renaissance art, Renaissance magic, Renaissance science. When you look at Renaissance paintings with their hierarchies of being, their emphasis on light and illumination, their mystical symbolism, that's Neoplatonic imagery. When Renaissance magi like Pico della Mirandola talk about human dignity and potential, that's Plotinian anthropology. But here's what's really wild. Plotinus's influence doesn't stop in the Renaissance. German idealism in the 19th century, Hegel especially, is deeply indebted to Neoplatonic structures. The idea of spirit, Geist, realizing itself through history, moving from unity through differentiation back to unity. That's a Platinian pattern. 20th century process philosophy, certain strands of phenomenology, even some contemporary philosophy of mind, you can trace Plotinian DNA throughout. And it's not just academic philosophy. Whenever you hear someone talk about spiritual but not religious, about consciousness as fundamental to reality, about mystical experiences of unity, about the physical world as less real than some higher dimension, those are Plotinian ideas that have filtered down through 2,000 years of Western culture. Now, does that mean Plotinus was right? That's a different question. There are serious philosophical objections to emanationism, to the idea of the one beyond being, to the whole hierarchical structure of reality. Modern physics gives us a very different picture of the cosmos. Neuroscience offers alternative explanations for mystical experiences. But here's what you can't deny. Plotinus offered a vision of reality that was intellectually rigorous, spiritually profound, and culturally powerful enough to shape civilizations. He took Plato's abstract forms and built them into a complete cosmology. He gave people a philosophical path to the divine that didn't require revelation or faith, just disciplined contemplation and the courage to question the nature of reality itself. And maybe most importantly, Plotinus reminds us of something we often forget in our materialist age. That consciousness might be more fundamental than matter, that there might be levels of reality beyond the physical, that the universe might be structured by meaning and value and not just blind physical forces. You don't have to believe in the one to find that provocative. You don't have to accept emanationism to appreciate the philosophical ambition. Plotinus offers us a profound vision of a unified cosmos where everything, from the highest divine principle to the humblest physical object, is connected, where your consciousness isn't an accident of evolution but a spark of something ultimate, where the soul's deepest longing isn't outward for more stuff, but upward for more reality. That's the gift of Plotinus. Not a final answer, but a reminder that reality might be stranger, deeper, and more meaningful than the surface suggests, and the invitation to find out for yourself, through philosophy, through contemplation, through the ancient practice of turning the soul's gaze toward its source.